Hello. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. You've probably had lots of really interesting things if you've been here earlier through the day. This is obviously one of the last ones of the day, and where we're going to be looking at environment, health and safety professionals, but in the context of what they can do and what issues they have, what problems they have and what solutions there are in implementing environmental activities and strategies in an impactful way. Here, I'm David Towlson, NEBOSH Director of Learning and Assessment, but I'm also a health, safety and environment professional. But with me here today, I've got Kit Wells. He's the Managing Director at Little Green Consulting. Would you like to say something about yourself, Kit?
Yes, thank you, David. As you say, I'm environmental health and safety, call it a business management professional. I've been running Little Green Consulting since 2008. Prior to that, I was an environmental manager with a food and drink manufacturer. And since 2008, we've been involved in a whole range of business management systems, originally starting out as environmental with ISO 14001. But it's grown and grown, and over the years we've added a number of other standards, including 9001, 45001, 50001. Also things like asset management, which is 55001, and business continuity, 22301. I also get involved in actual environmental management, supporting companies, helping them with their environmental challenges on site. And I also get involved in the UK with environmental permitting.
Very good, yes. I'm also hoping to be joined later today as well by Ketty, and she's actually from actually works for a company at Raith Gourmet Trading Pty Limited, but I'm hoping that she'll join us later. Right. Anyway, shall we carry on? So I think the first thing that we need to clarify, actually, Kit, is what an EHS professional is, and I use that term guardedly. Sometimes we don't, are not necessarily thought of as professional, especially if we don't make popular decisions. What do you think an EHS professional actually gets up to? What do you think is their sort of main function of their role?
The main function, I think, is to bring that professionalism to that particular discipline, whether it's environment or health and safety, or indeed quality, depending on what the subject is. Yeah. There are compliance managers and there are environmental health and safety professionals. And the key difference really, I think, is having the knowledge, the expertise and the qualifications and the training in the particular disciplines. And very often in organizations, and I visit a number of organizations, when they're faced with challenges around environment or health and safety, it is that particular qualification, that professional they reach for. And whether you are an in-house EHS manager, where you're bringing that skill set and you are employed to have that skill set within the workplace, or you're a consultant like me who is coming in to solve a particular problem, you're bringing that professional skill set and that knowledge to the organization that they might not otherwise have. I think one of the things you find in business is that there are a lot of enthusiastic amateurs, people whose role it is not, the environment and health and safety is not their main role, but they do have an understanding or a knowledge that they need further help. And that also that knowledge that there is a limit to their skill sets. And that's where the EHS professional steps in. And whether the company is large enough to have one or more EHS professionals, or they're having to rely on external resource, that I think is the role that we provide.
I think you're right, actually, because it's very interesting about the enthusiastic amateur, because health and safety and environment, you know, you've got a lot of people out there who know a little bit about it. It's in the news all the time. Everyone's got an opinion on it. Everyone is an expert on health, safety, and environment. You know, from a health and safety perspective, people often think, oh, isn't it just a lot of common sense? Of course, that's not right, and so on. But you filter it through what you know, and so the world looks very simple to you. But in reality, of course, especially with the environment, there are lots and lots of connected systems and consequences. You know, when you throw something down the sink, you know, we actually live in one world, and it comes back to you.
Very much
You know,
so.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
but with the environment, I suppose people look at climate change in the news, you know, so everyone's got an opinion on it. They think it just boils down to using your car a little bit less, and recycling plastics, or whatever, and that's it. But of course, it's a lot more involved, isn't it, with discipline? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think one of the challenges that faces an EHS professional is that engagement with the senior management. It's that
Yeah.
understanding of what the role entails. I think too often in the past, the environment manager or the health and safety manager has been kept at arm's length, and has been seen as a necessary evil by senior leadership. And I think now the message is getting through that actually, where does the responsibility for the environment, for the health and safety within the organization lie? Of course, it lies with the top management, right up to the top. And I think some of the very high profile cases that have been in the news in recent years, where top management, senior managing directors, finance directors, etc., operational directors, have been prosecuted, and personally fined. I think that the fear of that is beginning to make people realize that actually they need the role of that professional. They
Yes.
need to have that information input.
And not just so they can blame them, obviously. No.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge is actually getting the message across to top management about what the role of an environmental professional is, or the health and safety. I think it's easier with health and safety because it's more immediate. The risk to life, to injury, is something that is going to be dealt with very quickly. When it comes to environment, you're looking at something that could take 6 months, a year, even 5, 10 years. I think only now top management are beginning to realize the impact of climate change and the need to save energy and things like that. And I find that when I'm talking to the leaders in companies, if I can put it into a context that they understand, so what are they trying to achieve? You're looking to reduce your waste. You're looking to save on energy, save costs, reduce the cost of energy. You're looking to use your raw materials more efficiently. All of those things start to tick boxes with the money men and with the people who've got a much wider breadth and strategy to drive the company forward. And when you're starting to put environment into terms of finance, then they sit up and take notice. And very
You're right,
often,
it's using language that they understand, isn't it? And actually in terms that they understand. You're absolutely, I mean, it's really interesting about the long-term things where the consequences are not immediate. In terms of health and safety, it's more the health side that you think it's where we were with things like you know, asbestos and carcinogens generally, that of course you don't see it for many years. And to a certain extent, smoking as well. You know, you don't see it for many years, and therefore there doesn't appear to be an immediate need to do anything about it. And you're right, many environmental things are much longer term. Certainly, the dangerous ones like climate change are much longer term.
You say that, and I'm minded of a client that I've been working with quite recently. They've had a very big development built next door to them, and it's sort of acres and acres of concrete and roofing. And in the recent flooding, for the first time ever, the river overtopped into their wastewater treatment plant. Now, that wastewater treatment plant has been there since the 1940s, and it's grown and evolved, and it has never flooded before. Now,
Yeah.
there is an immediate consequence of potentially from an environmental event.
Yeah.
And it's things like that that make the strategic decision makers sit up and take notice that actually there is an important factor to environmental management. And I think more and more, as companies are developing and looking at projects, looking at new ways of doing things, finally the message is getting through that actually environment does play a part in
It's
that
if it
project.
affects you, isn't it?
Yeah.
If it affects you, I remember that just with something simple when I was, newly qualified in health, safety, and environment. I was working for a company, and actually, it wasn't even EHS related. It was something to do with the IT systems. But because it didn't affect the CEO, nothing was done. And then one day it did affect them, and the next day it was sorted. It's just this sort of interesting thing. And actually, we had a very canny, what was it? An enforcement officer, actually. It was health and safety at the time. And we had some issue in the warehouse. It's a chemical plant. And he actually said to us, would it help if I issued you with an enforcement notice? And I actually thought, oh, hell, it'll make us really unpopular. I'll be in real trouble. And he said, allow me to make the decision for you. I'll issue you with an enforcement notice. And within a week, all the resources were there and so on, because it affected and there was a consequence. So there's an interesting dynamic about whether or not it affects you. But also, I think you mentioned this, we had a discussion earlier. Sometimes it's difficult to identify the people that might be affected, your sort of interested parties, to be able to engage them. And I think you had did you have a mnemonic for that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
One of the requirements in all the management systems is for the organization to identify who the interested parties are. They used to be referred to as stakeholders, but actually it's interested parties. And it's looking at what their needs and expectations are of the organization. And I was thinking how best to come up with a way of remembering who the interested parties are. And it's not an exhaustive list, but I use a mnemonic, which is actually RELIC FINDS, RELIC FINDS. What it stands for.
You're going to burst into song.
I don't think you'd enjoy that.
No.
You'd be taken off air. What it stands for is regulators, employees, local communities, investors, customers, financial providers, insurance providers, neighbors, directors, and suppliers. Now that covers pretty much all the interested parties that an average organization may have to deal with. And it's about identifying what those needs and expectations are and what the pressures they place and what requirements they place on the organization. And in all, I've used this with a number of organizations, and there are times when you think, actually, do you know, there might be, in this particular case, some additional interested parties like the media, like special interest groups. I think I can think of one particular organization I deal with that looks after a large area of wetland along the River Cam. So they have some very special interest groups around that. But also, because of the nature of what they do, they also have to engage with the media quite strongly. And it's how you're going to address those needs and expectations. But also, it's looking at what the significant levels of power or influence they have over the organization. So like a director who will have a lot of power over the business, but also a lot of influence. Regulators may also have power and influence, but local communities may have influence but no power, for instance. So it's really about how you identify who those significant interested parties are and what they do, what the impact is on the organization.
And I think one of those things brings me back to one of the challenges. I mean, one of the ones was getting, like we discussed earlier, the buy-in from top management. But obviously there is a range of interested parties, so clearly that can potentially lead to a lot of conflicting priorities as well. Well, you're trying to satisfy one over the other and so on, and that obviously relates to environment, health and safety as well, where you can have conflicting priorities. So are there sort of ways of dealing with that? Sorry,
yes, absolutely. It's first of all, it's asking yourself what sort of levels of interest and what sort of levels of power do these organizations have, or these interested parties have, over the business. One of the ways I've done it is to create a set of questions. It's a set of 10 questions asking first one way, then the other. So does this interested party have the power to make changes within the business? Does the business have power to make changes within the interested party? Does the interested party affect the life cycle or any life cycle elements for the business? And it's asking those pairs of questions and looking at how that scores out to give you that idea of who are actually the most significant ones that we have to deal with. Interestingly, I think in all the various management systems I've done, the top four tend to be directors, employees, regulators, and customers.
Right. They're the ones that come up most often in terms of the most powerful and influential.
Yeah.
No, that's good. And I would guess as well, even within, even if within the same company, you might get people, like we said before, that might not be that interested in the environment, who are far more interested in health and safety. And you, especially as an EHS professional, you might be competing internally for the same resources. That might be time, money, skills. I don't know. And it's obviously resources are not infinite. So clearly one aspect is who you're trying to please, like we've decided here. So clearly the consequences of not fulfilling your regulatory compliance, especially with the like the Environment Agency, will take a very dim view of that, and civil sanctions and enforcement and all the rest of it. But within that, there also might be things which need to be done on the environment and sort of activities that need to be done, but actually someone thinks that some, like, I don't know, a hold the handrail campaign is more important, for in some area. I mean, that's a frivolous example, but it's difficult. How would you argue that the environment might be more important?
It's a difficult one because, as I said, health and safety tends to take priority because it's the more immediate issue. It comes back to what are the strategic priorities of the business, and also at what are the levels of risk that have been imposed from an environmental point of view. And one of the things that you're required to do is look at the significant environmental aspects. And it's how you go about identifying what the aspects are for the business. So,
is this your Charlene mnemonic?
Yes, one that I've bring from a former trainer who trained me. But there's another very useful mnemonic, which is Charlene, SHARLENE. What it stands for is solid waste, hazardous material usage, air emissions, raw material usage, land usage, effluent, nuisance, and energy. What that does is allows you to identify what is going to be the significant aspects that the business is going to have to deal with. It's quite interesting. People actually quite often get the different get aspects and impacts muddled up. Best way of thinking about it is think of washing a car. So the activity is washing the car. So that you're going to go out and wash your car, and the environmental aspects, well, there's going to be some solid waste from that. There's going to be some effluent. There might be a bit of hazardous material usage in the form of chemicals. You're using water within that, and maybe a bit of energy. Let's face it, there might be the noise from it, which is causing a bit of a nuisance. So,
oh yeah, especially if you're using a high pressure hose
on a Sunday morning
at
7 o'clock in the morning. The impacts are what changes do those aspects make on the environment. So there could be a potential pollution from the effluent running off or the chemicals. Those could lead to pollution in a local watercourse, killing fish, damaging aquatic life. One impact might be prosecution if you've gone ahead and done that. That's an impact on a business, or you've used a non-renewable resource, using up water as a raw material. There is energy use somewhere that energy is being generated, and that is puffing out, if you're still relying on coal-fired or oil-fired power stations, puffing out fumes. So that's a secondary impact. And it's considering what those environmental aspects and impacts are that is critical within a business, that then allows them to prioritize whether or not an environmental situation is going to take priority over a health and safety one.
Yes, yeah. No, I mean, it can be quite complex, especially with you when you don't have, there is not a sort of a standard answer to this, is it? Because it depends on the context and what a business is facing and the resources that they have. But obviously you can knock off a few thinking the law says you must absolutely do this, because the consequence, I mean, okay, not everyone obeys the law, all of the time. But or at least allegedly, of course I do. Yeah, because it's so complex, and actually, not everything is that obvious to everyone, which is why you need the specialists, and you've got these competing priorities. But at least that sort of helps you do it in a consistent, logical way, where you're weighing up and taking the risks that you have, understanding them, and actually thinking, well, I've got these choices, and these are the consequences of those choices, and I'm doing that knowingly rather than just sort of like winging it. I think sometimes it's interesting, touching back on that about conflicting priorities again. I think one of the challenges that we have sort of touched on is this sort of resistance to change or lack of interest from interested parties, and we've had a little look at that. But I think partly we've answered the question in terms of using the language that they use, making them understanding in their terms, aligning with the business strategy and business objectives. But it's a sort of, I think it's a question of communicating with them frequently as well, isn't it?
I think the key thing is with that, and it's something I do very early on in any implementation I do, is that I sit down with the senior managers and actually talk through what a management system involves. And
yes,
the people who really get the best out of it are the ones who understand that a good management system should be underpinning the business, whether it's quality, environment, or health and safety, or asset, or whatever it is. They're all structured in the same way. And in a way, it's like a story that you start with identifying what the organization's context is, who the interested parties are, what's the world that we're operating in. And from that, what are the significant issues, both internally and externally? Then you're starting to create the scope for the management system. You're starting to put in place policies. This is what we're trying to work to. This is what and it's getting that senior leadership buy-in to that process. Yeah. If you can then link that into a risk register and very often the risk register sits with the board, or with the directors. If you can demonstrate how you're starting to link your management system into that risk register, and from that start to develop objectives, targets, plans, that are aligned with the business, then you've got senior leadership buy-in. Then you've got their interest, because you're actually demonstrating that you're using environment, health and safety and quality to further their objectives and their aims for the business. And if you can get them on board with that very early on, then you've got a really strong approach to safety and environment and health. And
It's interesting. Sorry,
yeah.
it was interesting you mentioned that, because I was at a conference recently where it was kind of like the other way round, where someone was on the receiving end of it. It was actually a senior leader. This was a banking company, a banking organization. And she was actually the senior manager, the top manager. And she was sort of honestly recognizing that she didn't understand environmental stuff at all, and that she was having to learn from the sort of younger generation and the environmental professionals below them. So actually she was sort of honest with herself, and she sort of said, well, help me to understand all of these issues. And one of the things that occurred to them was that they were approaching environment from a tokenistic point of view. So it was things like they were effectively using it as a marketing or PR tool. So both internally and externally. So for example, they would have, albeit laudable, but actually they would have clean up the beach days. They would have, a few things like that. And she realized that whilst that's good, it's not enough on its own to make a difference. So she was sort of challenged to make it far more integrated. This is why I'm coming on to it about the management system, far more integrated into the business. So for example, in their travel policy, whenever anyone was going to an overseas conference, the question was asked, do we need to send 6 people? Do we even need to go to it? These are the things which save, actually do it at the root level, rather than, saying, right, I'm going to offset it, for example, or I'm going to make up for it, I'm going to do a beach cleanup, that kind of stuff. But actually, it's the waste hierarchy, isn't it? Do we even need to do that at the beginning? Yeah. Yeah.
I come back to what I said earlier about putting it into their language.
Yes.
We need to reduce the wastage, whether that's time, materials. If you think in a manufacturing business, what about offcuts, things like that?
Yes.
We need to reduce the amount of energy being used. So within an office environment, are we turning the lights out? Are we running the air conditioning with the windows open? Things like that. Are we allowing compressors to run with leaks, which probably the most expensive form of energy you can have? Are we actually doing something about the cost of that energy? And by doing that, can we reduce the amount of energy we're using, whether it's gas, electricity, whatever, or replace it with a cheaper alternative? What about working more efficiently? Can we use materials more efficiently? That reduces the raw materials we're bringing in. That reduces the waste going out. So all of those actually have a financial benefit as well as an environmental benefit. And it's getting that message across in the language that the board is going to understand. And it's why I very often, and I will begin an implementation with a senior leadership briefing. And I will sit the leaders down and say, what are you actually trying to do with this? What are your objectives? Where do you want to go with this? And do you know how it can benefit you? And that very often, that will kickstart it with that leadership team on board and supporting the process.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is wrap up there, Kit. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to get Ketty to join us, in which case I'll interview her later. But thank you very much for your considered thoughts. Obviously, you're not an enthusiastic amateur, well, certainly not in EHS, and that you've got consistent approaches and which are aimed at managing it for not only for the companies, but also for you know, the planet, really. I mean, not for the planet will survive quite happily without us, but actually the people on the planet, most importantly. So thank you very much. Have you got any final comments, just to sort of wrap up?
Really, that I think that it can be a pessimistic view, but also it's incredibly rewarding. I've seen I've worked with companies that have gone from being one visit away from prosecution to achieving phenomenal environmental results over a short space of time.
That's a wonderful thing to put on the side of the company, isn't it? One visit away from prosecution instead of how many days without incident. But that would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you probably don't want to admit to being that close to prosecution. But it is. The thing is, you can actually make very significant financial benefits and gains wrapped up in environmental speak. And whether on the face of it, you are achieving that reduction in waste, that reduction in water usage, saving energy, being more efficient in what you're doing. But actually, from a business point of view, that is so financially advantageous. And it's how you can use that to satisfy your shareholders, but also to satisfy the wider public that you are an environmentally sensible and sound business.
Yeah, and that's really good. That's sound advice. That's being genuine about it as well. Right, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, that's excellent. I've now been able to get hold of Ketty, so that's really good news. Ketty, do you want to introduce yourself? Say a little bit about yourself.
My name is Ketty Mupakwa. I'm based in South Africa. I'm a SHEQ officer at Raith Gourmet Trading Private Limited, and I'm a NEBOSH International Diploma holder and base candidate, and I'm a graduate member for SHEQ, South African Institute of Occupational Safety and Health.
So we like NEBOSH people, so that's good. So you're very welcome. Well, I mean, we like anybody actually, but especially like NEBOSH people. So that's really good. I mean, like we discussed with, I discussed with Kit earlier on. I mean, it's worthwhile. What's your take on an EHS professional? What do you think are the skills that an EHS professional brings to a company?
Okay, an HSE professional is an individual who is responsible for both health and safety of the employees and environmental sustainability of the organization. They can be full-time employees, part-time employees, or consultants.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they I mean, clearly there, as you alluded to, there is this sort of, they're qualified, they're professional. I mean, what does professional mean in reality?
Yes, they need to have environmental management qualification or environmental science qualification. Like, for example, the NEBOSH International Diploma in Environmental Management, or the NEBOSH National Diploma in Environmental Management, or any other degree in environmental management.
Because they need to be competent. Yeah.
Yes, they have to be competent, yes. Yeah. And they also need to have key skills to do risk assessment, because they must be able to identify an organization's aspects and impacts, because they will develop a mitigation plan on how to control those significant impacts, because they do have environmental risks, and there's need for risk control strategies in an organization for an organization to be sustainable. Yes.
I mean, that's really good, because it's basically this management skills, isn't it? Just as well as technical competence, like you were saying, being able to identify the aspects and impacts, the sort of activities of an organization that lead to environmental impact, either positively or negatively. But they've got to be able to then manage it and control it. So there is that strong management element. No, so that's really good. I mean, we discussed outside of this meeting the challenges facing an EHS professional. I think one of the ones that we particularly looked at was conflicting priorities that they often have, and particularly due to things like, because of, you know, resource constraints like money, time, skills, and all the rest of it. I mean, what do you consider some of the biggest challenges within that, or have you got an example of the biggest challenge within that of conflicting priorities?
Okay, I think the competing priorities is the main challenge for health and safety for HSE professionals. It is the main challenge because there are a lot of competing priorities because there is need for a balance between those two. So an HSE professional is sometimes caught in between these two because they are equally important and they all require his or her attention. So there are about five competing priorities. The main one is compliance obligation versus cost control, because there are compliance obligations that are mandatory and some are voluntary. And these, it's also cost control because management always want cost control and operational efficiency. So you are caught in between now because the organization want to reduce the cost of operation, and you want the organization to be sustainable and you want to be compliant with the compliance obligation. So what you can do is you need to know all the compliance obligation, then you can choose the most significant one. You can leave the voluntary one because you want to save, you want to cut the cost. So it's better to start with the mandatory one because the mandatory one will attract fines.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These are sort of the legal compliance ones, as well as perhaps, I mean, I suppose there might be customer compliance things, and
yes, they are also customer.
Yes. Yeah.
So so you need. There are also customer requirements that are very significant because for the business to progress, you need customer. You need the market expansion. You need more customers. Yes. So there are also customer requirements that are very, very significant. So you need to understand which ones are significant between the mandatory ones and the regulatory one, the mandatory one and the voluntary ones, because it's not only the mandatory ones that are significant. So when you do that, then you need to explain to top management because they need to understand this. They don't have the knowledge. They didn't do environmental management. It's you who is qualified. It's you who has the competence. So you need to explain to them so that they understand what is required of the organization. And you can explain to them, you can come up with a plan and a proposal of which ones you can prioritize. Then that way they will understand. And there is also need for a strategic alignment. You need to understand the context of your organization, and you need to understand the strategic objectives and goals of your organization. Then you try to align with your own compliance obligation objectives.
So this meaning that if you're aligning your sort of tasks and your objectives with the requirements of the organization, or the way the organization is going along, so you're all heading in the same direction, you're more likely to be listened to, I guess.
Yes, because because what we need to do is you need to make sure the management understand how your sustainability objectives, how your compliance objectives will contribute to their strategic objectives. Because their strategic objectives can be financial growth, cost reduction, high profit margins, market expansion, customer certification, or brand reputation. You need to align. You need to explain to them so that they understand how these compliance obligations or how your sustainability objectives will contribute to the overall objectives of the organization, so that you get what we call executive buy-in.
Yeah,
you need
like
to see your strategy. Yes.
Like simple things like, you know, you will avoid going to jail if you do this.
Yes.
You will save money if you do. So it's in sort of language they understand. Yeah.
Exactly. So and if you also explain to them that if they are not compliant, then they can face enforcement actions that may be result in paying off fines and huge fines, or maybe closure of the business, temporary closure of the business, and they will lose because there won't be any production that will be going on. So they need to know all that. Once they know that, they will buy in, and you can get the commitment from the top management.
I mean, one thing that I've certainly seen a lot is sort of, and we've talked about this before, is the sort of greenwashing and tokenism, where people see environment as just in terms of isolated activities rather than managing it in the round. So, for example, activities like cleaning up the beach or doing a cycle to work scheme, which are not wrong, but if that's all you do, it doesn't really actually make that much difference. Whereas trying to embed environmental thinking in the organization, like in an integrated management system, so that it's right at the heart, is what's the difficult thing. So how do you sort of manage that?
Okay, what you can do is you can implement an integrated management system, because the integrated management system is connected. You can connect it to the health and safety management system or the quality management system, then run a SHEQ management system. Once it's integrated, then it means the objectives are integrated, the policies are integrated, procedures are integrated, the implementation, including the records of implementation, everything is integrated. Performance evaluation is integrated. Collection of all this data for performance evaluation is integrated. So that is the best way, because if it's integrated, now it's viewed, it's equally important as any other function of the organization. Because if you run it separately, if you run it separately, it will look like it's something that is not important. So you can face some resistance to change, because for them, they would think it's something that is important, because we are kind of isolating it. So the best way is to integrate it with other functions of the organization, like the health and safety. It best integrate with the health and safety management, because there are a lot of synergies and interconnectedness between those two. So that is the best way. You can even integrate in the job descriptions of the employees, so that they know that environmental responsibilities are part of their job description, as well as production, health and safety, and any other responsibility.
The environmental health and safety person often isn't the person doing all of the environmental things, but actually they're often organizing it and helping people to sort of do and facilitating the environmental activities that lead to impact. But the real people that often are involved in delivering environmental benefits are the employees, not just top management, but actually the employees as well. And how do you help them get buy-in and motivated to be part of the environmental improvements?
Okay, the first and foremost thing is to maybe do what we call a training needs analysis.
Yes.
Then you do a training gap analysis, because you need to evaluate the competence of the employees. Are they competent to perform the duties, or are they competent to take on the responsibilities under the environmental management system? Then when you do that, you need to train them, so that they understand, they have an understanding of what environmental management entails. Because some of them, they don't know that, they don't know the importance of environmental management, and they don't even know what it is all about. So they need to have a good understanding of what environmental management is and how it relates to their duties. Then you also need to involve them when we are developing procedures and when you are coming up with objectives, because sometimes we develop procedures on our own in the office, sitting in the office, without even consulting with employees in the factory, without even going even to the production managers, to the department managers and the employees, and try to understand how things are done, because it's them who are on the ground, it's not us sitting in the office. So we need to work with them, involve them, because once they are involved, they have this sense of ownership and a sense of belonging, and they have pride in those procedures, that, oh, it's part of us, we are part of this, and they will definitely work with you and they will follow those procedures. And you also need to share with them the performance of the system, because sometimes we just collect our data, performance data, we do our analysis, then we present to top management without even giving feedback to the employees who are on the floor, who are actually doing the work. We need to give them feedback so that they understand that, oh, our effort is yielding this, so we are working towards achieving environmental sustainability for our organization. That way, I'm sure we will achieve good results.
No, that's good, because it's actively taking active steps to involve them and making them feel part of it. You're right. I mean, it did make me chuckle earlier on, but you're right. Sometimes you can sit in an office and create a procedure and actually how you think things happen. But of course, this isn't reality. And the people on the job are the people that actually know how it happens.
Yes,
And
they
they're
can even come.
Yeah,
they can even come up with some solutions or some control measures. They can suggest good measures. They have good suggestions, those people, because they work on they can tell you what is possible and what is impossible. Because sometimes you can think some things are impossible, yet they are not possible. So if you work with them, you can agree, you can reach an agreement on what is the best way forward, because they are on the floor. They know what is happening. They are doing those activities every day. So yeah, they need to be involved. Yes.
No, that's really good. We'll sort of be closing now, but have you got any final sort of tips and advice to the listeners on implementing impactful environmental activities in the workplace?
Okay, maybe I can only touch on the issue of training time. Training versus production is quite a challenge to have time to train the employees. It's quite tough getting employees off the floor to come for training. Wherever you be giving them training. Maybe it's in a classroom, by a workplace, on PowerPoint. It's not easy to get employees from the factory. So maybe I can just share some few tips on how maybe you can do that. You need to develop a very efficient training program that prioritizes critical safety topics, critical environmental topics, so that the little time you give, you touch on those critical environmental issues. Because sometimes we overload the employees with unnecessary information or redundant information. So we need to have an efficient training program. Then also our training, we must tailor our training to specific job roles and responsibilities, because not all employees need the same level of training on every topic. So focus on what is relevant to the people's tasks, to each and every individual's task, or to each and every level of the level of the employees on the organogram of the company. So because there are different responsibilities and different levels of competence required. So you need also to look into that. Then the other thing, you also need to use e-learning platforms. There are e-learning platforms nowadays, or mobile apps that the employees can maybe check when they are on maybe there's a downtime, or maybe there's off hours, or maybe during their lunchtime or during their tea time, they can check and they can understand what you are trying to explain to them, because you may not have them like coming for training, but if they go on those platforms, they will be able to learn what environmental management is, what procedures they have to know, and what information is required, what information is recorded for each and every impact. And the other thing is you can also schedule training during off-peak hours or off-peak shifts, because the different shifts in an organization, it's not like they will be busy from 8 to 5 every day. There are sometimes they are not busy. So you must understand your organization. You must know that this department is busy from 8 to 10. Then from 11 to 12, they are not very busy because they are waiting for this and this. Then you can have them during that time and train them. Then you must also break down the long training courses into shorter and digestible modules, because sometimes we have very big modules of a lot of slides overloaded with information. We must try to make the training simple and interesting with some examples, some photos, some videos. The training must be interesting so that the employees can listen attentively and understand and even ask questions, instead of taking employees for 1 hour training, then some of them will start sleeping. It will not save any people. No. So our training must be interesting also. Then the other thing is you can also use on-the-job training for those employees who are not easy to get from the factory. You can do on-the-job training. You go to their departments and train them while they work. Then you can train them while they are working. You can also train them, and maybe they can understand even better, because you'll be training them while they're on their way, giving examples of what will be happening right at their job site. Then also you can also implement ongoing refresher training.
Yes, that's right.
Training sessions at shorter intervals. maybe after every maybe 6 months or after every 4 months, you do a refresh instead of waiting to do it once a year. You can try maybe to have it at shorter intervals. That way, I think it will also help with the training. Yeah.
But that's a good thing, because it's really good. It's sort of, if I can summarize that, it's making the most of the time that you do have them for. So making your training work and be impactful. The other thing that you mentioned was be flexible. So using e-learning, working around them. And the other one I really liked was the idea of integrating it with the job, so that it's not seen as something separate, but it's actually part of the process. Environmental thinking is part of the procedures that they use, the safe operating procedures, the environmental operating, whatever you want to call them, but actually of getting the job done. It's always in their thinking. So I quite like those sort of little tips. They're good.
Maybe I can touch on, did you touch on the complex regulatory framework? Did you touch on that one?
Yes, okay, yeah. You're right. It's the issue of the complexity of the regulatory frameworks, isn't it? Which is a challenge for EHS.
Yes. Well, there are a lot of regulation, there are a lot of acts and bylaws, depending on which country it's different in different countries. But I think what we need to do is to just adapt to the changes, because that's the reality. We cannot run away from that. The regulations will be changed continuous, and they're going to be more and more because of what is happening with the environment. So I think it will be a good thing to use the regulated compliance software that can track and provide updates on any changes.
Yes.
You can use like the examples like the Enablon, the Interlex, the Regscan. There are quite a lot. They can track the changes in the regulations and update you so that you stay up to date. Because like I said, we need to adapt, because that's the reality.
It is constantly changing and moving on, isn't it? And you with understanding, with science as well, as we learn more and more things and the effects, and just look at climate change. Over the last 30-40 years, we've learned so much about it and the effects, and tracking it, that sort of changes our thinking through it. But no, I mean, if we do, I think the sensible advice, as you say, is you need to be adaptable. And
you can also consult maybe with the experts. They are legal experts and consultants who specialize in environmental law. If you are constantly in touch with them, they can let you know that there is a change in this regulation. There is a new regulation which says this and this. And you also need maybe to network with other professionals, because they can keep you updated. Any change, I joined a lot of networks: WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Facebook. So each change, or you can even learn a lot. There are changes in technology. You can learn a lot in addition to the changes in the regulations. So you can learn a lot from joining professional networks and associations also, or you can also collaborate with the regulatory bodies. They can update you on any changes that is made, so that you stay up to date with the changes in the in this complex regulatory framework, because they are really complex and it's a lot. And we need to understand each and every one of them.
We certainly do, and it's somewhat of a challenge, isn't it? But thank you very much indeed, Ketty. I'd just finally like to thank Ketty and also Kit, be my guests on here. Thank you very much for your insights and your learnings, and I hope the audience enjoyed those too. Just thank you again.